Comic Geek Speak presents Back to the Bins, episode 471. Hey there, guys, this is Ian. We got a special release for you this episode, as this is a rebroadcast of our good friend Paul Spataro's podcast, Back to the Bins. This is episode 471. It was released a couple months back, but we haven't had a chance to release it on the Comic Geek Speak feed, so I figured now is as good a time as any. This is episode 471, titled Comic Geek Speak, The Hoon, and More. Paul is once again joined by Chris Eberle and Adam Murdough of CGS, along with a cameo by myself as I was rushing back to try to be a part of this. I was actually out to dinner that night and got in right before they were done recording. So I'm saving the book that I would have been talking about on that episode for a future episode of Back of the Bins, which hopefully we'll be recording sooner than later, if things work out correctly. But they bring their love of old books and perspective to the show, which always makes for a good time, according to the words of Paul, and I 100% agree with that assessment to the T. So check this one out. It was originally released back on July 17th, 2021. And once again, this is episode 471 of Back to the Bins. And a reminder out there, patreon.com/Comic Geek Speak for any of you who would like to support the show monetarily. That would be greatly appreciated. Or just shoot us a review on iTunes. And you can shoot a review on iTunes to Back to the Bins if you like what you hear here as well. And once again, a big thank you to Paul for having the guys on. We are a huge fan of Paul. I've known him for years, and we run into each other usually at New York Comic Con. This year it didn't happen, unfortunately, but in previous years I usually run into him and his son on the floor at least once, and hope to do so again next year. But enough of me here. Let's head to the episode itself, shall we? So I will give it away to Paul and the guys here for Back to the Bins, episode 471.
And now, it's time to sit back and enjoy the Two True Freaks Internet Radio Broadcast.
Stop it! Genesis! What's in the box?
Disenfranchised by the modern comics industry, producer Paul Spataro, Dr. Bill Robinson, and Scott H. Gardner now
ply the time stream in a never-ending quest to rediscover and reconnect with that unique brand of fun and excitement that can only truly be found in good old-fashioned, randomly selected comic book back issues. Journey with them now. Back to the bins.
I got nowhere else to go! I got nowhere else to go! I got nothing else.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Bins. I'm Paul Spataro, and this time I am joined in a much overdue guest show by Mr. Chris Eberle.
Hello.
And Mr. Adam Murdough.
Nice to be back to the
Of
bins.
Comic Geek Speak fame. We are also scheduled to be joined by Ian Levenstein, but he is unavoidably detained, and we're going to try and persevere and hope he gets to us before we're done. But we can't promise. If he can't get here tonight, then I will have him on another night, and I don't think that'll be an issue. But it's always great to get my friends from CGS on. I look forward to it when we could do it. I like to say look forward to doing it a couple of times a year, but it usually happens we do it every couple of years, just by chance. That's the way
I thought it was annual. It's not annual. I thought it was annual. No.
I think we shoot for. I think we when we talk about it, we say every 6 months would work, but I think the reality is we end up shooting for annual, and then there ends up being a couple of month lag before we get to do it. Everybody's got busy schedules, and I totally get it. And I'm always glad when you guys make time to talk to me. So just before we get into our books, how you guys doing?
Murdough, you can go first.
Okay. No, doing fine, Paul. Just beginning to shift from Pennsylvania to New Jersey modes here. My family lives in 2 different states, It's a family business thing. And so we're going to be hearing quite a bit about the Garden State in this episode, I get the feeling.
That works for me. And Chris looks like he's just finally winding down after another long school year is coming to a conclusion.
Yep, I'm like Murd. I'm a full-time New Jersey resident, and been persevering through this very trying year, a trying year for everybody in different ways. And shows like this, and just reading comics in general, are as always a tonic for the spirit. So
Absolutely, totally.
Paul,
agree
thanks
with
for having us on.
in what's been a very trying year.
Yeah.
You know, as has been my wont through my entire life, comics have provided me a shelter and an escape from reality that I don't know, especially when a couple of these books were written, I don't know that the writers knew that they'd have, people of our age and ilk still finding solace in these books, but boy, they really do.
Hear, hear.
So, my normal way of doing things is when I have guests on, I let you guys choose what order we're going to do our books in. So, by all means, I'm willing to go first, second, or third, or if Ian gets on, even fourth. But, I'll let you guys just determine the order you prefer to go.
Paul, I think as the host that you should go first.
That is okay with me. And I chose, and as I let you guys know, I chose what is the earliest issue of the Amazing Spider-Man run that I have in my personal collection. And I have a certain amount of fondness for this book because it is a byproduct of the fact that I do this show, that I have this book. A listener contacted me and said, I have copies of Spider-Man number 11 and 12 that are pretty much, beaten to hell, but I really don't have any use for them. If you give me your address, I'll mail them over to you.
Terrific.
I sent them over, and
nice.
They are beaten to hell, but I'm still very, very proud to own them and very happy to own them. So I took Spider-Man number 11, which is the first one, and again, the earliest in my collection, thanks to the generosity of others. It has a cover date of April of 1964, and the cover is drawn by Steve Ditko. It shows Spider-Man in the hold of a ship, I assume, because we can see all the rivets in the walls and floor around him. And he's kind of cornered by Dr. Octopus, who's coming at him. And there's a lot of actual verbiage on the cover. It says featuring the long-awaited return of Dr. Octopus. Considering this is issue 11, I don't know how long-awaited that was.
That's classic Stanley hyperbole right there.
Exactly. And it says, turning point. See what happens when Spider-Man decides to reveal his secret identity to someone else. Will he really do it? I got to actually open up my other copy here because it's too small on my screen. There we go. Will he really do it? Will this be the turning point in his amazing career? But why not turn these pages and learn for yourself in this classic tale told in the marvelous Marvel manner? Another spectacular smash hit from the House of Ideas. So right off the bat, just my thoughts on the cover. It's dynamic in that Steve Ditko dynamism way, which is very different from other people's dynamic covers. You compare it to somebody, when you think of the definition of dynamic and you think of like Neil Adams or somebody like that, it's extremely different from that. But just the same, it's got a certain charm to it that I love. And it's Ock looks very menacing, and yet, despite the strange nature of his being, he looks kind of believable to me. Just moving on to the synopsis, we open with a splash page showing Spider-Man being accosted by Betty Brant, who's declaring her hatred for him, with the shadow of Doc Ock looming over them. How did we get to this point? Well, let's see. As was the norm of the day, Peter is sitting and moping about his love life with Betty Brant when he hears a radio report that Dr. Octopus is about to be released from prison. He recounts his initial encounter with the 8-armed fiend and heads to the prison to explain to the warden why he should not be released. The warden tells Spider-Man that Octopus has served his time and tells him to get the hell out of here before he has him arrested. Knowing that Octopus will probably go back to a life of crime, Peter develops his now famous Spider Tracer to allow him to track Octopus wherever he goes. When he tags the car coming to pick up Octopus from prison, he's shocked to find Betty Brant driving. He also finds that she dropped a map to Philadelphia from the car when she picked up Octopus. Remember, this is a pre-GPS era, and Rand McNally was a viable business at that time. But again, this belies our New Jersey roots in this episode and takes us into Philadelphia. Anyway, we meet Betty's brother, Bennett, who is both the lawyer for crime boss Blackie Gaxton and one of his best customers, apparently amassing a large gambling debt. In order to clear the debt, Bennett has agreed to enlist Dr. Octopus to free him from prison. For reasons that escape me, this somehow requires Betty to pick up Ock from jail and bring him to Bennett's apartment, where the criminal is dismissive and abusive. Peter decides that he needs to travel from New York City to the city of brotherly love for the weekend, and his routinely overprotective aunt agrees without even inquiring as to his method of travel, where he's staying, or who he's traveling with. He tracks down Betty, tells her how he feels about her, and decides that he needs to tell her about his dual identity. Meanwhile, Dr. Octopus frees Gaxton for the promised return of $100,000, which, using an inflation calculator, would work out to $861,464.52 in today's dollars. They take Betty and Bennett as hostages as they escape by boat. Spider-Man arrives but clumsily sprains his own ankle before even encountering any bad guys. Despite this, he takes out the thugs while Doc Ock is otherwise interfered with. But, oops, Bennett is shot by a bullet fired by Blackie that was meant for his sister Betty. And, of course, she blames Spider-Man for her brother's apparent death. Spider-Man re-incapacitates the thugs and battles Dr. Octopus around the ship, emptying a fire extinguisher in his face so that he can make sure Betty is okay. At this point, everyone wants to use her as a hostage, but she conveniently faints, and Ock transfers to a smaller boat so that Spider-Man can have less maneuverability if he follows. As they battle, the small craft runs into a pier and throws the two of them into the water, where Ock escapes. The police arrive and arrest Blackie and his gang. Later, Betty tells Peter that she hopes to never see Spider-Man again because she couldn't bear being reminded of her brother's death, which throws a wrench into his plan of revealing his secret identity to her. He walks off sadly, wishing that the Lonely Man theme had been written to accompany him. And that's my book for today. And
good synopsis, Paul. Good synopsis.
Thank you. It's one, lately it's become a rare thing for me to actually do a pre-written synopsis. Usually I do it off the cuff, or I steal it from the Marvel Wikipedia. But today I just felt the desire to sit and actually write something out. I got a kick out of this book as I was reading it, and a lot of it is based on nostalgia from when I was a kid reading these books, and just the Stan Lee style of writing. There is one point I noticed, I don't know how closely you guys looked at this, but there was one point where I noticed where he's fighting and he reaches down to his ankle, which clearly Ditko meant to show that he's hobbled from spraining his ankle, and he wanted Stan to write some sort of dialogue to that effect. And Stan just totally discarded that and went on to some other point.
There's the infamous lack of communication between Stan Lee and Steve Ditko once again.
Yes, I'm going to really quickly look and see if I can find what page it is so I can refer you to it. I should have put it in my notes. There, it's on page 16 of the story in the bottom right-hand panel, if you have access to it in front of you.
I'm looking for it as we speak.
Then,
I have an old Marvel Masterworks, so I think my page numbers are different.
Well, it takes place during the battle on the ship. Let's see if I can direct you to it. It's the page before the fire extinguisher.
Okay.
In the bottom right-hand panel. Adam, had you read this one
yep,
at any point previously?
I see that. Yep.
I had not and still have not read any of the selections for today's episode other than my own, Paul. I'm sorry. It's pretty much the same situation it was last time. I didn't get shot on back to the bins. I don't have very many collections of early Silver Age Marvel, and the few I have I got from Chris, either as presents or as raffle gifts. And I was hoping I could at least tell you that I had read this story like 30 years ago when my friend Matt and I were young teenagers, and he let me borrow one of his, the one Amazing Spider-Man Marvel Masterworks edition that he had. But unfortunately, a quick Google search just tells me that that volume contained only Amazing Fantasy number 15 and the first 10 issues of Amazing Spider-Man. So,
there you go.
Yep, I actually have not even read this issue 30 years ago. So
okay, this one I have this in multiple formats now, as I explained, including the original, but I also have the Masterworks, and I have the DVD of all the Spider-Man books, and just I probably have this in 5 different formats by the time I'm done.
That's like Shane with his Justice League. Crap on a cracker, as he would say. Paul, I really am glad you chose this because, I mean, I'm a lifelong Spider-Man fan. I've read all these stories, but I haven't read this issue in many, many years. So it was great to revisit it. I mean, I kind of knew what happened, but I didn't remember really much of the details. So for me, what was thrilling was all the classic elements that make the Lee Ditko run so great are here. Everything from, Peter, nothing goes right. He wants to reveal his identity that he can't. Of course, he injures himself inadvertently, and that handicaps him throughout the fight. The police, of course, once again mistake him for potentially being a criminal. And you also see a lot of the hallmarks of what made Spider-Man such a compelling character in the 60s compared to other superheroes. Him thinking about how he's going to do his fight in thought balloons, which nobody else really did.
Yeah, that was definitely a Stan Lee innovation.
Yeah, and obviously the quips, the humor. And you made a great point, Paul, also that, and this is very Ditko, when you look at Dr. Octopus, what makes him all the more creepy is that he looks like a real schlub who you could actually meet. And that's what makes him all the more creepy and sinister because, I probably met this guy at some point. I mean, I ran a comic book store. I definitely met a guy like this on more than one occasion. And
that's our everlasting shame, that stereotype that we have to live with.
but as Chris likes to say, it exists for a reason.
Yes, there's always a kernel of truth. And the issue reminded me of what Ditko did so well was to draw just sort of the ugliness of quote like normal people. And I mean, granted, I don't think he never drew the most compelling women, which is one of the reasons why John Romita Sr. was so successful when he revamped Gwen Stacy and introduced Mary Jane. But when it came to drawing like gangsters, passersby, villains, I mean, Ditko sets the tone for the whole Spider-Man universe.
It's funny because we've mentioned in the past about how Kirby could draw real good ugly people, and Ditko has that same skill, but in a very, very different way.
Yes,
the
absolutely.
Two, you'd never mistake one for the other. They really were like different ends of the quality spectrum. Both being of high quality, but so different in style, and such innovators at that time that it's just phenomenal to see what was going on. I think his pacing, Ditko, in this book, and his
it's superb.
Just his drawing of like movement and battles and everything is really just so well done.
No, I mean, Ditko, when we think about, I mean, obviously we think of Spider-Man today as this multimedia phenomenon, but when you think about how he was introduced, I mean, it's just serendipity. This is the perfect artist to establish the tone and look of this type of character. And when you contrast, like I can't help but contrast it to like some of the DC titles of the time, which I also love, but no one's ugly in those DC comics. Like, everyone kind of looks like almost idealized. And in Ditko's world, the shadows, the sordid, slums of the cityscape, and just the way people walk and move and gesture, it's so real in so many ways. I mean, granted, there's almost like this exaggerated, sometimes pulpy, Norrish element to it, which I also love. But I mean, right in this one issue, everything to know about why Spider-Man was great, it's all here.
Now, I totally agree with you about the shadows and everything, and I think it's a point I've made several times about Ditko when you compare early in his career and you look at his Spider-Man and his Doctor Strange, and then you look at towards the end of his career, and I always have kind of come to the conclusion, and let me know if you do or don't agree with this, but I've always come to the conclusion that later in his career, people were intimidated by him and didn't really understand what made his work great when he was, a younger innovator like this. So when they would take his pencil drawings and ink them, they would oversimplify them, and they would lose that shadow, and they would lose a lot of that noir feeling, and it would almost look more, for lack of a better word, cartoonish than what it did in his early career when he was an innovator. And when I see later Ditko work, it's always disappointing to me because of that. I would really love to see some of those books taken by, a real quality inker who has the confidence to, really do it upright, but not necessarily, I don't necessarily want like a Klaus Janson who's going to impose his own style on it, but somebody who's going to try and recreate the style that Ditko had early in his career.
I think that's a very valid point, and to contrast it, I believe these early stories he inked himself, correct?
Yes, I'm pretty sure.
You definitely see, and I know what you say. I know what you mean about some of the later work. I definitely think the contrast is quite evident. And like the last panel where they have like the sort of ethereal vision of Spider-Man with head down, walking ahead of Peter, like again showing the burden Peter has to carry as Spider-Man. I mean, that's such a classic Ditko image. And when you think about, like, when you go back to because they don't really do this much in comics now, of course, but the title page gives you a sense of what the story is going to be about going forward. But just look at that page, like the shadow of Dr. Octopus, and like the question mark, and Spider-Man's arms outstretched in dismay, and it's just it's great. But I also love, though, because it's that team that, even though obviously their partnership didn't end well, but Lee's dialoguing and his captions, and of course his salesmanship, which, like, when you read the cover copy, that's classic Stan Lee carnival barker, right? Getting people to buy the book. And then look at that title page, like that lower bottom yellow arrow. See Diabolical Dr. Octopus. See The Secret of Betty Brant. See Spider-Man's greatest victory and his most bitter disappointment. I mean, if I'm like a young kid, I'm putting down my 12 cents, man, because I want to see what's going to happen here.
That's the inner cover after you've already put down your 12 cents.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have enough room to put that on the front cover because you already had so much hyperbole there.
But again, the core greatness of the Marvel concept is here. Like when you go to the first page, and how many superhero books start with a superhero sitting just alone in his room, no mask on, just thinking. And
that was a total change from the DC.
We take that for granted now, but that wasn't being – again, these are the reasons why Marvel was seen as such an innovator when it first appeared like this, because the characters didn't do this type of stuff. They didn't have like these moments of reflection or inner agony or insecurity and it's all there. So
and that's where I get, I don't want to say offended because that would be the wrong word, but bothered by the people who want to now discredit Stan Lee and say, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and Don Heck, they were the guys, and I'm trying to think of who else was there at that time. This is, I guess, pre-Gene Colan, who we're going to get to shortly. But, they want to totally give them all the credit to make up for the fact that Stan had too much credit to begin with. And the reality of it is, I think it truly was a marriage between these guys. And yes, Stan and Steve had an angry marriage, but they had a marriage just the same. And I think, it was Stan's innovation and Stan's dialogue that really, brought it all home. And I always think that's brought home by what we see when Jack Kirby took the reins totally when he went over to DC and he was dialoguing and scripting his own stories. He had some marvelous ideas, and I still love those books, don't get me wrong, but they don't have the same accessibility that they did with Stan writing them.
And I concur wholeheartedly. We've talked about this many times on our own show over the years and Murd and I have both – I always go back to Murd's wonderful statement that he made. 2/3 Kirby, 1/3 Lee, but that 1/3 is really important. And Murd, again, I salute you for that very astute observation, but – I agree 100%, Paul. I mean, all the invaluable contributions these pencilers made, and again, they didn't get the credit they deserved until more recently. But Lee's contribution is I mean, he was setting the tone. He was creating the interconnected universe. He was getting people to buy these books through his narration and the playful approach and especially with Spider-Man, really creating a personality for Peter and Spidey through that dialogue and those all-important thought balloons, which I think are sorely missed in comics today.
I agree totally.
Especially
people try to make up for it with narration boxes, but it doesn't have the same.
Spider-Man's thought balloons are one of some of the most compelling aspects of that character's history as you read through. So, Paul, I salute you. This is a great selection.
And just as I don't want to focus too much on the Lee Kirby Ditko
go ahead, it's fine.
issues, but just I think the reality of it is Stan got the lion's share of the credit because Stan was that carnival barker, and from everything I can tell, Ditko was pretty much introverted when it came to dealing with the public, and Kirby was too busy just sitting there cranking out penciled pages day after day to be a promoter of his own work.
Go ahead.
I had not actually remembered this until my cousin reminded me. But back in the 1970s, we went to one of the Manhattan hotel shows, and we met Jack Kirby there. And I had no recollection of this until my cousin told me that. And he was even saying, he says, the reason you don't remember it is because he was so quiet. He was respectful. He thanked us for coming over to and all, but he didn't really have a lot to say to promote himself because that just wasn't his style.
No, the work he did was what was promoting him, and unfortunately, that wasn't fully recognized and given its due until really more after when he was older, when he died. And of course, as we all know, recently his family finally got the financial compensation that they were long due, and the recognition. But I agree with you. I mean, part of Lee's job was to edit and promote these books, and he was really good at it. And certainly there were plenty of opportunities where he took probably more credit than he certainly should have, but I don't think that diminishes what he did here. And I agree with you. Like part of it is personnel. Like Steve Ditko famously went to one convention in the 60s and then never went to a convention ever again. Ever. So, very much an introverted person who, lived pretty much in isolation. And of course, his whole objectivist political ideology, which is a whole nother discussion. But it's like you said, it's very different personalities. And for a brief period of time, they just found a way to make it work. And we all benefit from that.
Absolutely. So. Any thoughts to add on this one, Adam? Just not necessarily on the book, but just the whole conversation?
Nope, I think you gentlemen have said it well. Besides, Chris has already represented me.
Well, and with an excellent quote and thought, I agree with it totally. All right, so now, as is our wont on Back to the Bins, we rate these books.
Yep.
Cover, art, story, and then overall. So I'm going to go first with my book. I think it's a very compelling cover. I really like the line work on it. I think it is overly verbose, but I can deal with that. So I'm going to say a lower A, maybe like an A minus. The interior art. If I have a criticism of the interior art, it's as the book goes on, it looks to me like Ditko might have started to rush a little bit and started to not put as much background detail as he went on further. But that would be the only criticism I have of it. I think the pacing is phenomenal. I think the action scenes are incredibly well choreographed, and I think the emotion is showing on the faces of the characters that you literally could page through this book without reading a word of dialogue and still understand exactly what happened in the story. So I'm gonna say an A minus on the artwork, the interior artwork as well, and. I think Stan's dialogue just enhances it that much more. One third better because of that dialogue, as a wise man once said. So I'm going to say overall just really I'm going to say A minus is all around on this thing, and go right through. It's not quite like an all time classic to get an A plus, but it is I can really not fault it at all.
See, for me, when we talk about Silver Age and like early Bronze Age Spider-Man, I'm hopeless. Every book's an A. So, the lead Ditko really Spider-Man through right through the death of Gwen and the Goblin. Well, the death of the Goblin in quotes, but I don't find much fault with any of those issues, and certainly not any from this period.
As I've mentioned many times on the show, my first book as a collector, that somehow some switch got clicked in my brain, and all of a sudden I decided I have to get as many of these as I possibly can, and it became a lifelong obsession, was Spider-Man number 131, which is with this ring I thee web. So it got incredibly silly as soon as I walked on board. But I have a tough time criticizing any of those books too, because that's my era. That's when I walked in.
On the show, we've talked many times about, especially my love of the lunacy of the Spider-Mobile and that whole period. So I'm right there with you, my friend.
Yeah, it's I have a tough time criticizing anything until, I don't know, ever. It's just Spider-Man is my, as is with the case with you, Chris. Spider-Man is my character. He is my sweet spot in comics. So the only reason I came A- instead of A is because I'm trying to be objective.
Fudge it, Paul. It's your hill. It's your beans.
All right, so that'll do it for our first book. And which one of you gents would like to go next?
I volunteer, Paul.
Go for it, Adam.
All right, hold on. I'm gonna punch the cover image of your book onto my screen because that's all I have to go on. I am ready.
All right, so we're gonna have a nice little Marvel sandwich here, and in between the two slices of Marvel, we're going to have a tangy, savory filling composed of the Hoon. That's right, I said the Hoon, Hoon. This is. Yes, my selection here it's going to be our indie selection for this episode of Back to the Bins. It's extremely obscure, for which I apologize. I'm kind of dwelling in a bizarre mirror dimension here where I'm unable to see my fellow co-hosts' picks for this episode, and they can't see mine. They tried, bless them. I mean, Paul was saying that he went on mycomicshop.com, and he found a copy, but it would have gotten here too late to be read for this episode, so perfectly all right.
A little disappointing that mycomicshop.com was the only place where I could really find any reference. I was trying to see if there was something where they described the contents of the issue, or when I did an image search to see if there were maybe some pages so that I could sample the artwork a little bit.
But Paul, in a way, that's for the best, because I can assure you no one will do a better description than Murd. So.
I have said in the past, and I will continue to believe until somebody proves me otherwise, that I do not know anyone who has a better vocabulary than our friend Adam Murdough. So, by all means, go with it.
Can only aspire to live up to your praise. We'll just see if I've got it in me today. Okay, so The Hoon is a very obscure mid-90s small press title. It was the first issue, The Hoon #1, which is what I'm holding here, was published in 1995. It was written and drawn by one Rob with two B's, Bihun, B-I-H-U-N. And I'm pretty sure that the name The Hoon is derived from the surname of the author. It was published under his Eeny Weeny Comics vanity imprint. The corner logo has a picture of a little dachshund on it. And the Hoon was actually the Hoon is the name of the title, the main character, he was the breakout character from an even more obscure previous title published by Eeny Weeny called Funny Time Features, in which Rob Bihun also wrote and drew. And actually, Billy Tucci's She did a guest shot in one issue of Funny Time Features. So I guess that series claimed to fame. And the Hoon spun off from there. So yes, the front cover of the issue is kind of a corker, actually. That's what drew me to this comic in the first place, because in the early 90s, well, I guess it must have been the mid-90s, in an issue of Wizard, the Guide to Comics, they actually gave this a little bit of a promotional blurb. I'm guessing they spotlighted it in their price guide section. And there was an image of this cover right there. It shows the Hoon himself. And to describe the Hoon, you gentlemen are familiar with the character Six-Pack from Ennis and McRae's Hitman series from DC?
I don't think I am, actually.
Well, he's an overweight, disheveled, unshaven gentleman, always drunk, because that's the source of his superpowers. He wore a tiny derby hat on the top of his head and an ill-fitting superhero costume. stretched out over an enormous beer gut.
Great stuff.
The Hoon is kind of like a kinder, gentler, on-the-wagon version of Six-Pack, at least in appearance. Yes, he shows no signs of alcohol abuse, but he is borderline obese, hirsute. He's got a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. He's 5'8", 300 pounds of superpowered flab poured into poorly fitting and not recently washed wrestler's costume. And the cover of this issue, the first of his series, shows him sitting in costume, because he never takes it off, on a log in front of a crackling fire, a campfire outside. He's roasting a marshmallow, and he's looking around him saying, "Hey, where you got going? I haven't gotten to the scary part yet." So apparently he's been telling a ghost story, and then looming up behind him is a large, shaggy figure, its face concealed by shadow, with horns coming out of its head and giant clawed, hairy paws reaching out for him. It's casting its silhouette on the logo, the title logo, the Hoon, which I'm guessing you guys can't see it very well through the camera here, but the two O's in the word Hoon looks like what can only be described as a double titty twister gone terribly wrong. I guess alternatively like two white balloons that have been tied together into kind of a balloon origami version of like an infinity symbol. It's a little disturbing if you think about it too hard. But anyway, that's the cover. Quite eye-catching. It promises some of funny / spooky goings on in the pages within. The story opens with a little 2-page establishing scene telling us that the story is set in the storied Pine Barrens region of southern New Jersey, which is an area that has a certain fascination for me because I mentioned towards the top of this episode my family owns some property in a town called Stone Harbor, which is a little resort community on the Jersey Shore near Cape May, and we have always taken a backwoods route to get down there. Instead of taking the more obvious AC Expressway to the Garden State Parkway, which is what most people from my part of Pennsylvania do to get to southern New Jersey, we drive through the back roads, and we actually do pass through a narrow little neck of the Pine Barrens on our way down to Stone Harbor. So I know a thing or two about the Pine Barrens, what it looks like, what the geography and culture are like. And I can say from reading this issue that kudos to Rob Behun for at least setting the story there, but he didn't do quite as much research as maybe he should have. But anyway, the first couple of pages in the story set the tone. It's nighttime. There's a farmer who his name is Bill Pruitt. There it is. I found it. He's heading out to the barn to feed his horses when suddenly he and his horse are attacked by a strange, monstrous figure only seen in shadow. And we cut from there directly to the title splash, Tales of the Hoon, A Devil in Jersey. And the first sight we have of our title character is the Hoon sitting there in all of his moon-faced, unshaven glory. He's got a hobo's bindle over his shoulder with one hand, and he's sticking out a thumb to hitchhike with the other. And we're seeing him from the point of view of the driver of a pickup truck who is slowing down in the midst of the Pine Barrens to pick him up and give him a short ride. And then we get another page or two of the Hoon expositing to us about his current situation. He's talking to the driver, and we see all of this through the driver's point of view. We never actually see who or what has picked the Hoon up in this pickup truck. It could be a ghost, it could be an alien, it could be a serial killer. We just don't know. Which, intentionally or unintentionally, it's kind of an eerie effect, which is a good further tone setter for some genuine spookiness to follow. But the Hoon is explaining to this unseen driver that he used to live in a place called Supertown, which is apparently your standard superhero comics metropolis where lots of superheroes hang out, in such numbers that apparently the city fathers just threw up their hands, waved the white flag, and named the city after them. And he explains that he was one of the biggest heroes there, but then, in Funny Time Features number 3, 4, and 5, he was accused of a crime that he doesn't remember committing and felt he needed to skip town. And so, for some reason, he randomly decided to make his way to the Pine Barrens of New Jersey to find this fresh start. And he asked the driver to drop him off in a small town called Batstow, New Jersey. He immediately heads to the general store, and I can believe that there are certain towns in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey that still have those, where he inquires about a room to rent, and he immediately gets an earful from the prim old lady shopkeeper about recent sightings of the Jersey Devil in the area. And the Hoon asks her for more details, and she, to talk his ear off, he is distracted by two boys he notices shoplifting a comic book. nearby. So he excuses himself abruptly, goes out and chases these two boys, whom we later learn are brothers. Their names are Billy and Timmy. The Hoon confronts them about stealing this comic, but the two of them they recognize him, and they immediately lay into flattering him, kissing his ample ass as much as they can, and even offering him a place to stay. And so he is kind of forced to forget about bringing them to justice for shoplifting the comic. And they lead him away to the little shack that they occupy with their father on the outskirts of town. They put the Hoon up in an even smaller shack that the boys built themselves as kind of a clubhouse. So they stuff him in there they give him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a comic book to read. So they're kind of treating him like a stray dog they found in town. And the Hoon spends the night there. And there's another cutaway scene of an older woman who's hanging up some laundry to dry at night, and is also attacked by this mysterious, monstrous being whom we're left to assume is the Jersey Devil. The next morning, the boys come to find the Hoon in what's probably the funniest moment in this comic, which I should say is... you kind of get the impression from the cover that this is going to be a humor title. It's not as funny as perhaps it should have been. The high concept I give it is kind of like Ben Edlund's The Tick meets Twin Peaks with maybe a little Scooby-Doo's.
Wow, that's quite a combination. Holy mackerel.
Yeah, so it's good at building the atmosphere. It actually leans a little bit more to the Twin Peaks than it does to The Tick, part of its genetic makeup. Unless we're talking about some of the darker, moodier stories that Ben Edlund sometimes told, like the Deertown Hobbleville stuff, starring like Chainsaw Vigilante or the Man-Eating Cow. But anyway, the boys come to find the Hoon that morning. They ask him, how'd you sleep? And then we get an aerial shot of the Hoon with the upper half of his body smashed through the wall of this tiny little clubhouse. He's sprawled out on the ground, and he's saying, could have been better. And that's the biggest humor play I can really get in this issue. So the boys go into the shack and ask their father for permission to let the Hoon stay with them. The father is never seen from behind his newspaper. He assumes that they've just brought a stray dog into the house, and he continues to believe that even after the Hoon speaks. A little strange. He asks the boys for a little more background about the Jersey Devil, and then we get a one-page origin story from the boys about what the local folklore says about the Jersey Devil. And it goes to the tune of... back in the mid-1700s, the mid-18th century, there was a woman living in the Pine Barrens named Mother Leeds, who had 12 kids, was pregnant with a 13th, and crying out in anger and distress, she said, I'm tired of children. Let this child I bear be a devil. And sure enough, the baby, when born to her, is horribly deformed and demonic in appearance. It terrorizes the Leeds family and then spreads its leathern wings and flaps off into the night. And that is the story that Billy and Timmy tell the Hoon, and he just kind of shakes it off. And he spends the next several days just kind of hanging out, being the homeless adult best friend to these two children. And they're playing baseball in a field, and the Hoon happens to come across a human skeleton with what looks like a couple of monster footprints on either side of it, on the other side of the fence separating the field where they're playing ball from the edge of the woods. He kind of hustles the boys away from the fence, and later on that night at like 3 a.m, he sneaks away to investigate. The boys hear him leaving, get out of bed, and follow him into the dark, creepy woods. And while the Hoon is kind of off investigating on his own, the boys are the ones that find the source of the trouble. They come across a group of armed men doing something probably illicit, and the boys decide to run back to town, find the Hoon, find somebody to report this, when suddenly they are captured by a large, looming, hairy-horned and taloned figure, looking just like the thing looming over the Hoon on the front cover. And it turns out that this is not the actual Jersey Devil, but just a large, muscular henchman in a monster costume. The Erzatz Jersey Devil brings the boy back to the camp of these armed men. The boys talk tough to the boss of this group of men, saying that the jig is up. They know just what's going on here. They're going to expose them to the townsfolk. And the boss calmly orders that the boys be killed. But then the boys say, you know what, I think we're the least of your problems. We got company. And they point over the thug's shoulders, and sure enough, coming through the darkened woods, whiffling through the tulgey wood and burbling as it comes, the actual Jersey Devil appears. And we got this great, one full-page splash. This is all in black and white, by the way. I realize I haven't mentioned that yet, which really kind of enhances the mood of the whole story. But yeah, that's this great full-page rendering of what Rob Behoon thinks the actual Jersey Devil should look like. Looks like a humanoid bipedal cow with large curling ram's horns sprouting from its head, big tusks coming out of its lower jaw, cloven hooves, big bat wings, and a long dragon tail. And it's looking to settle a score, I think, with the people who've been impersonating it and soiling its bad name. And that's pretty much all we get in the first issue of the Poon. It's similar to what Paul was saying earlier about how nostalgia drew him to select the Amazing Spidey number 11 for this episode of Back to the Bins. It was nostalgia that drew me to this comic too. I know it's not very well known. In fact, it's the precise opposite of well known. It's extremely obscure, but I do have a fond memory of reading this. It was one Friday night in September or October. My folks and I were heading to Stone Harbor for the weekend. I was riding in the back seat of their minivan. It was dark, so in the full moonlight, we're driving through that little neck of the Pine Barrens. I purposely saved this comic to read until we got to that point, and it's just a perfect example of the right reading material at the right time. Just blending the material, fusing with the reading context, the atmosphere of the story blending with the atmosphere in which it's consumed. And the medium and message seamlessly merged, and it created a great, eerie, faintly macabre little reading experience. Just equal parts humor and suspense. And it's... I have to admit that I mentioned earlier that it's not as funny as advertised, and also in terms of dialogue and script and plot, it's more than a little bit weak. But the artwork, was in stunning black and white. It just more than makes up for it. It just perfectly creates this eerie backwoods sense of desolation. Creating the idea of this little town in a desolate corner of the New Jersey pine forests where you could imagine a creature like the Jersey Devil stalks at night. If I can jump directly to my gradings for this issue, I would give it an A for front cover, and an A also for artwork. Story, no better than a C, and overall, I think I'd probably give it a B minus.
Murd,
go ahead, Chris.
Who published this title again?
Rob Behun self-published it. His company was called Eenie Comics. That's EENIEWEENIE, all one word.
And this is the mid-1990s?
Yes, indeed. Yes, actually, there's a little essay by the author in the back where he mentions that he was a student of the Kubert School. Ross Andrew was a major role model of his artistically, and he was good friends with Derek Dryman, who was one of the creative prime movers in the early seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants. He finished the art and story in late 1994, and it was published in June of 95.
And how many issues did it run? Do you know?
I don't, but it was definitely more than one. I've seen cover issues up as far as number 5. I'm looking at the My Comic Shop page on it. There's 6 different covers, 6 issues that they have the covers from. Oh. And I'm just looking, because it's all I have to look at. But I'm looking at these covers, and I'm thinking that Mr. Baihoon, he did have some artistic chops, so I'm not surprised to hear you say that he went to the Kubert School. I'm a little surprised that this was not enough to get him noticed and maybe get some more work doing, something a little bit more mainstream, unless maybe he didn't strive for that. I don't know. I have no knowledge of his history at all. But I'm looking at the covers, and like I said, it looks like he had some definite skill here. I can't comment to his storytelling, his pacing, if he would fit into the Marvel method and all of that stuff. But as far as just being able to render an image, it looks like he's got some real chops. I particularly get a kick out of the cover of issue 5, which looks to be a takeoff on the movie poster for Gone with the Wind. And it's got the Hoon, but looking, a little bit more buff and with a little mustache, and he's holding a super heroine in his arms, much like Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara. So it's kind of with flames in the background. I think this is more than a vanity project, or at least I'm kind of interpreting it that way. I think this might have been more of a kind of a let me get my name out there and show people what I could do. And like I said, I'm a little surprised that it didn't lead to at least something more. you would think that you'd find out that he at least got a shot at, an annual or something.
I'm just going to hazard a guess. Maybe he wasn't able to get it into previews at the time, or maybe wasn't able to get it distributed. I mean, I don't know. But
it's entirely possible. I'm not sure how or where I found a copy of it, because it was kind of hard to dig up even in the mid-'90s, closer to when it was published. But I think you're probably right, Paul. It's more than just a vanity project, but I'm not sure. I would have called it a labor of love, actually. I'm not sure how seriously he wanted to break in to doing comics elsewhere, although judging by what he says about himself in a little essay at the back, I think he was a big Marvel fan, and he probably would have made himself fit into the Marvel method if he got the opportunity. And it's kind of surprising.
Back in the late 70s and early 80s, when I was misguidedly thinking I had more talent than I did, I was very quick to run off photocopies of everything that I drew and send it over to Marvel and DC's offices and see if I could land myself some kind of a job. So I would think if you went through the effort of putting together 6 issues of a book, where you actually had it printed in, at least a professional format to some extent, I would think you'd send copies to these publishers if you were looking to work for them. I mean, it only makes sense to me.
Well, I don't know. I mean, again, in his own words, he was a little bit hot and cold when it came to comics. He describes how when he got to the Kubert School, within a year, he suddenly, for reasons he still didn't understand, lost all interest in making comics, and instead learned the arts of storyboarding and moved out to L.A. to work in that part of the industry. And
that could explain it totally.
Yeah, and then his friend,
he may have found that was more welcoming to his talents, and I can only say, I discovered quickly that I just was not nearly as talented as I thought I was. But even if I had been, I think it is a very, very difficult door to walk through. So I would imagine work is much more readily available for somebody in Hollywood than it is in the comics industry, because it's such a small number of people who are actually producing, viable work.
Well, Murd, do we know if he produced anything else, or is it just those 6 issues when it comes to his name?
As far as I know. Well, plus there was the anthology that preceded it, Funny Time Features, which was also published under the Eeny Weeny Comics aegis.
But it's
Murd, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I welcome obscure little gems like this to the show, because especially a show like this where, Chris and I both picked very mainstream books. So to counterbalance that a little bit with something that people had not heard of before, I think is really the best way to go, as opposed to just, here's 3 books that everybody loves, goodbye.
Murd, outstanding. As always, you taught me something.
Well, thank you very much. I thank you and the listeners for their indulgence.
And no one sets atmosphere better, because having been to the Pine Barrens myself, I can imagine like a young Adam Murdough in the back of that minivan, the moonlight coming through the window of the van as you read your comic. Outstanding.
My Pine Barrens experience is limited to the episode of The Sopranos. When
I was thinking about that. He's still out there.
I would be curious if anybody is listening to this, and whether it be on the Back to the Bins feed or as we've done in the past, I anticipate that this will probably be available on the CGS feed.
Absolutely.
If anybody's listening to this and you're familiar with the Hoon, whether it's just a very passing familiarity or if you have a greater familiarity than even Adam, please let us know. Get back to us and let us know, because I'd be very, very curious to find that out.
Absolutely. All right.
So, keeping moving on. Now, I'll tell you, Chris, I am used to you coming up with almost a combination of hidden gem in the mainstream. You've come up with some things in the past like Prez or
Shang-Chi.
Some Shang-Chi or Black Panther or what was the other one? Did you Secret Defenders? I think you brought one also.
No, that wasn't me. I think that was Murd.
That seems more like the kind of thing I would do, because I really did enjoy that book.
But in past episodes, I'm used to, like I said, mainstream hidden gems. This time around, you are hitting on one that I've known for many, many years. and I knew it not because of the original issue, but because it was featured in Son of Origins, which nobody's going to see this because we're in an audio medium, but Chris is holding that up to his camera as we speak, and I could reach back and grab my copy if you like.
Yep. I picked this, Paul, because whenever we discuss Daredevil on the show and like the history of Daredevil, this story always comes up. And like you, I was given Son of Origins as a Christmas gift. It was printed in 1975. I was given it in like the early 1980s. I was a little kid. And it was one of my earliest exposures to Daredevil. And I think it was before I'd read any of the Miller stuff, actually. And the reason why I selected this, because there's, like you guys, there's that nostalgic aspect. But also, this is one of those Silver Age stories that I think gets to the essence of a character and also still translates really well to modern reading sensibilities for the most part. And finally, the Gene Colan artwork is so breathtaking in this story that alone demands as much reverence as possible. So I'll give a brief synopsis because, like Paul said, I'm sure many listeners have read this story or have heard of it. So we're looking at Daredevil issue 47. So that's from Volume 1 of Daredevil, the original run that began in the Silver Age. And the title of the story is Brother, Take My Hand. And I have a full-blown poster of this cover as well. I don't have it up at the moment, but that's how much this story means to me. So it's issue 47, Brother, Take My Hand. I believe it's 1969 is the year it came out.
It's cover dated December of 1968.
So it's definitely 1969 that it came out. Written by Stan the Man Lee. I'm going by the credits here. Gene the Dean Colan art. Inking by George Klein. Lettering by Artie Simic. So the story opens in South Vietnam. So it's the Vietnam War, and a crowd of U.S. soldiers is on R&R, and they're waiting for Daredevil to appear to put on an exhibition for them. And we're introduced right away to an African-American soldier named Willie Lincoln who is going blind from wounds suffered in combat. And he's talking about how the doctor says eventually the sight will fully go, and Daredevil appears, and he puts on a display of acrobatics, and Willie loses his sight in the middle of the performance, and he ends up in the hospital, and then Daredevil comes to visit him. Of course, Willie doesn't realize that Daredevil's actually blind, and he reveals that Willie reveals that, well, I can't go back to my civilian life because I was a police officer. I can't do that job anymore. And he returns to the States, and Daredevil says, you should look up, my friend Matt Murdough, who's a great lawyer. And Willie goes to the welfare department. He meets Karen Page, who at this point in history, Matt and Karen Page are not together. And in fact, Matt was ruminating in a thought balloon about how he misses Karen, and they're separated. And she, as a social worker, refers Willie to Matt for help. We find out that Willie has been framed by some local mobsters, and that's why he's been kicked. He's been suspended from the force. And you've got a great classic Matt Murdock as lawyer sequence where he tricks the witnesses into revealing their sinister scheme, and then the mob boss tries to then have Willie killed. And this is one of the main reasons I chose this story. There's an amazing sequence in the dark where the mobsters break into Willie's apartment, and Matt, first this is Matt Murdock in the darkness, takes on all of these hoods, and then he switches into his Daredevil costume, and he defeats all of them, and then the mobsters think that Willie himself has actually beaten them because they can't see, and the story ends with Willie sitting with his seeing eye dog. And by the way, Gene Colan was a huge lover of dogs, so he would love drawing dogs in his stories. And Willie just thinking about how, maybe life isn't as bad as I thought it was. And I feel like I'm part of the human race again. Murdoch never made a big deal about it because he knows Matt is blind too. When you get down to where it's at, maybe that's what brotherhood is all about. So a very Stan Lee ending. And that's the issue. So a couple things. The artwork, I think this is the first Gene Colan story I read, except for maybe a Tomb of Dracula Power record I had too. So I know you get a grin from that, Paul. So early
Absolutely.
Gene Colan. And even as a young kid, I realized I was absorbing art that was on another level in terms of excellence. And even then, and even more so now as an adult, I really appreciated how Gene Colan used shadow, created atmosphere through things like window blinds and curtains, and the way he's created a situation in a room, and the way he portrayed Daredevil fighting. I was blown away, even as a young kid, by how he used, vaulting over furniture and flipping and throwing people over his shoulder and the different moves of acrobatics. And like when he's doing the exhibition in South Vietnam, the way he portrays Daredevil moving across the stage, I mean, so thrilling, just to get that sense of constant kinetic energy. So there's that. And then, of course, it's classic late 60s Stan Lee. So it's topical, but it's also safe. So Stan was always wanted to sell books. So he'll bring in things like the Vietnam War. He'll never take a stand on any of it because he doesn't want to alienate any particular reader. So he should be commended for again, referencing Vietnam. He brings in which one of the things Stan did often, he would bring in African-American characters and give them prominent roles in these stories, which was no small thing, when in the Silver Age. And, Willie is a police officer. He's a capable figure. He's brave, but he needs help, which Matt provides. But at the core of this, and in fact, there's a scene where when Matt is leaving South Vietnam, he's flying home, he's thinking to himself, war, the most brutal, most idiotic, most loathsome manifestation of all that's wrong with mankind. Very Stan Lee, kind of taking these very philosophical but also kind of safe takes on very controversial issues. So to me, this is a story that really goes to the heart of what made Daredevil such an exciting character from the get-go, and also is very much has that wonderful sort of late Silver Age feel of Marvel, topical but not too radical in its positions, and just stunning artwork. I mean, this is the Marvel method in all its glory, because that Lee just basically told Gene Colan to cut loose, and he does. And it's a book I loved when I was 8 years old, and it's a book I still love at age 48. So that's my pick.
Couldn't agree with you more. I first became aware of this one again in Son of Origins when I read it there. I meant to pull it out and actually see what Stan wrote in the introduction to it, just to see if it was particularly meaningful at all, but I did not. I've long bowed at the altar of Gene Colan, but I've said, I think Scott and I were discussing him not that long ago. We've discussed a few different artists, and I think I didn't have a true appreciation for him until I got older, because his art was almost at a level beyond what I could appreciate as a younger reader. As a younger reader, I wanted more simplistic things, and his artwork is not really simplistic at all. I've said many times, I don't think anybody draws characters in motion better than Gene Colan.
I agree 100%.
He was the master at that. There is never, I don't think there's ever an image where it looks like it's just a poster image where somebody's just standing there and looks to be static. They always look like they're moving, and his choreographing of fights is maybe the best of any artist that I've ever seen. And also, we talked about what Ditko did. I have to believe that Gene Colan kind of built a little bit on the foundation that Ditko created as far as the moodiness and the shadows and things like that. Because if you look back, if you try, when you try to be a historian with this stuff, and you look back when he was using his nom de plume, which I'm trying to remember, was it like Austin something or other?
It was Adam Austin.
Adam Austin.
Yep.
The artwork was much more simplistic, and then all of a sudden he just cut loose. If you look at the issues of Tales of Suspense when he's doing Iron Man, it goes from kind of simplistic, just house style of the time, to Gene Colan as we love him today. It's like in one issue the change happens. So it's something, it looks to me like he'd been wanting to do for a long time, but was trying to toe a line or something, either to make sure that they didn't recognize that it was him doing it, because the reason he had the nom de plume was because he was also working for DC at the time. or if it's just, hey, they finally saw his talent and said, do it the way you want to do it. I don't know which it was. Just as a side story for Gene Colan, and this is one, that just gets the awe at the end of it. I remember listening to an interview with Gene Colan on CGS, and I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, this has got to be obviously years ago because he passed away a while ago. Yep. But he had said on the show that, he wasn't actively drawing comics anymore, but that he was available, for you could order commissions from him.
Which I did.
Which I did not do right away. And he passed away before I got a chance to do it, and I curse myself for that every time because I had the opportunity. He was on there. He was actually soliciting commissions, which would have been just awesome to have something. What did you order from?
So I got a Howard the Duck, and I actually met him at the first New York Comic Con, the infamous too many people in the room, and they had to shut it down because they were overcrowded the space. And before we left, he was at a table, and I met him. He was very nice, and he was taking commissions, and I paid him for Howard the Duck, and he mailed it to me, maybe a few weeks later. And it's a full Howard the Duck with a cigar, and he's very dismayed because he's stepping in what appears to be feces. And it's a fantastic shot, and I cherish it. And Paul, I want to second everything you said, and I'm going to posit a theory here that I wouldn't be surprised if because of the Marvel method. And because Lee was such a fan of the artist he was hiring that Colan felt he could cut loose in a way that perhaps he couldn't if he was held captive to a house style, for example, otherwise. But when I think of Gene Colan, there's a page in Tomb of Dracula, I don't remember the issue, where the cast, like the vampire hunters, are all sitting in a living room plotting what they're going to do. And they're all just kind of either sitting or standing, but it's so dynamic. The way they're kind of gesturing, the furniture. Like I've always said, the way Gene Colan, because again it's the 70s, the way he drew turtleneck sweaters, it sounds silly, but you feel how warm those sweaters are. Like
there's like a texture to it, almost that you could feel.
I love reading his 70s work because the fashion of the time, the buildings. I mean, I think Tomb of Dracula is probably one of the real pinnacles of his career. Because when you talk about shadow and atmospherics, that's all that book was in many ways visually, besides the great stories. So this, again, I picked this because – and I picked this very quickly. There wasn't a lot of debate with myself because I've always wanted to talk about this in a little more detail, and it's the beginning of my romance with his artwork, even as a little kid. And I remember after I read this, I'm like – I'd always know, like, okay, I recognize that guy's work. Like, I'd seen him in other books, and I'd want to see more of it. So, and then, like you said, Paul, and I agree, as I got older, I started to really appreciate a lot of what he was doing there and the nuance of it. But great stuff.
Yeah, it really is. Just as an aside, Tomb of Dracula is one of the series that I had some issues in my run, and it's one of the ones that I'm looking to when I go to the stores, it's one of the ones I look to fill in blank spots in my run, hoping to get the whole thing. I probably can never afford to get that first appearance of Blade, because I'm generally cheap, and when I'm always looking for bargains.
Maybe you can find a really, really beat up reader copy.
That's probably my best hope of getting one. One of the other series that I'm going for, and it just kind of relates to having you guys on the show, is I've been looking to complete my run of Master of Kung Fu. And I went for years and years where the only issue in my entire collection was issue number 100. For some reason, I had that, and I never had anything else. And a few years ago, before they ever announced that they were going to have this movie, I decided, you know what, I want to get this series because I had seen some issues over the time, and I grew to start appreciating it, and I wanted to get this. I went to a store this weekend, and I picked up a bunch of issues, actually, because thankfully, even though the movie's coming out, it still hasn't skyrocketed the price on these issues yet. And I am down to needing 17 issues to complete that run, which is not bad considering I had one, and there's
I'll say
about 105, 106, something like that in the run. So I'm getting there. If only I had a Wild Pig Comics to go to, and I could probably find some of them.
That's true, Paul, but I'm retired.
But back to this issue again. I like the way in this issue, you mentioned how Stan hits on the topical references on it, and I think it's a combination. I think it's Colan's doing the same thing, but in this particular issue, it doesn't feel to me like I'm being beat over the head with it. The example I always give of being beat over the head is the Star Trek episode with Frank Gorshin with the "Can't you see he's got black on the right and not on the left" or whatever it is, and it's like can you be more heavy-handed than that? And if you read some of the like Roy Thomas's Black Panthers, Sons of the Serpent issues from the late 60s, they're good books and I love reading them, but the topical societal message in them just feels like it's they're banging you over the head with it. This one doesn't feel like that for some reason. This one feels just a tad more subtle than that. I think the fact that they chose to have a black man in the role, that's a great way to integrate it without ever making it about being black and white. And you have your message about war, and you have a lot of stuff in here, but it doesn't ever feel like they're getting preachy to you.
Well, I think that was my guess. Has always been, based on all I've read over the years, that was tended to be Stan's approach. Like he was clearly a thoughtful man who was thinking about a lot of these issues, but he was also someone who was trying to sell books. So I think he was, in many cases, and some people will find fault with this depending on how you look at it, but I think he was trying to strike a balance with things he was actually thinking about and concerned about with being a company guy selling comic books. And Paul, let me read to you the last paragraph of his intro to this issue, because I think you'd be interested in what he said. Speaking of stories, the one that follows, Brother Take My Hand, is a yarn of which I'm particularly proud. It involves another blind man, one who also happened to be black. It tells of a man who had almost lost hope, but thought there was no way back for someone like himself. It touches on man's inhumanity to man, one of the biggest problems that which faces us today. I admit it. I was trying to really say something in this story and to say it softly. But read it for yourself. You'll see what I mean.
Well, there you go. Okay, so
confirms what you were saying. Yep.
I agreed with Stan without even knowing it, which makes me feel good. I guess the only thing about this one that just kind of throws me off a little bit is the fact that Daredevil's like on a USO tour. I don't know how that happens.
Well, he talks about how celebrities and can do it. A superhero can do it too. So
yeah, no, I mean they kind of address it, but yeah, like how do you say, Daredevil, come and get this flight, and we're going to take you to Vietnam, and he's like, okay, I don't see that happening. But just the same, I think this was not. Doing it in Vietnam was uncommon, but to say, oh, this is a charity show and Captain America is here to do some stunts for you or whatever, they did that in the comics fairly frequently back then. So I guess this just kind of goes in line with that. And I keep paging through it, and I just love the art. The story is really good, but the art is what sells this book by all means. Any chance you've seen this one, Adam?
No chance at all. I've seen the cover for it. I know Chris mentioned it at some length during one of our Spotlight on Daredevil in the Silver Age episodes. But I do know enough about Gene Colan's artwork to have kind of a vague picture. As a matter of fact, I apologize, Chris. I could have given you a good segue for talking about Colan artwork, because I was going to say that Rob Buhn's art, in terms of how his awareness of and utilization of light and shadow, wasn't quite on the level of Gene Colan, but it was a couple of notches below. So yes, the chiaroscuro quality of Colan's art is well known and appreciated to me, and I would love to see that fight sequence you were talking about in mostly darkness.
Murd, next time we meet, I'll make sure you can see that.
We just reviewed a book recently, Scott and I, an issue of Ghosts from DC, and it had 3 stories in it, and one of them, I would swear to you, it was drawn by Gene Colan. I would bet my house on it, and it was not. And I'm trying to remember now who the artist was, because I would love to give you that information and see, let you see if you ever heard of this guy, even, because he was an artist I had not heard of. And I was convinced that it was also a different name that he was going under at the time, but no such information came to the front when we looked him up. But he was a guy who I would definitely seek out more of his work, just because it looked so much like Gene Colan. Just really quickly, it was a story about the specter of death, with the robe and the scythe and everything. He came and took a life, but very stupidly dropped his list of who he was supposed to be going to get next. So the police officer investigating the death or whatever, finds this thing, and he starts taking advantage of it. And Death comes to visit him, and basically the guy says, "Okay, I'll give you back your list if you promise me you'll take me off of it, that I will never be killed." And then in a I guess I was going to say Twilight Zone, but more like an Outer Limits type of ending, or Night Gallery type of ending. Death takes him off the list, but has him buried in a coffin anyway, so he spends the rest of his eternity alive, but in a coffin in the ground. So, the whole thing about that one we had to get by was the silliness that Death lost his list. But other than that, the artwork was just phenomenal, really, and that was what we came back to. But that's my very, very long-winded way of saying this. This guy reminded us so much of Gene Colan that it was phenomenal. And when I come across the name again, I'll definitely message you guys.
Please. And Paul made a great point before, because when you see Colan work before it's inked, the penciling detail is amazing. Like the sketch I have of Howard the Duck, it's not like some quick little thing. Like all the Colan detail you'd expect, it's there in the pencils.
I've never
breathtaking.
seen any Gene Colan art where it looked like he did just some basic figure work and left it to the inker to finish.
Nope.
Never.
Not that I've seen either. Yeah. Great stuff.
He's one of the guys who I am amazed that he was able to pump out work on a regular basis, because he was so detailed.
These guys were all amazing like that. I mean, the way they worked.
But some of them were able to do basic layouts. Even Kirby did some basic layouts over his career and let the inker kind of run with it. But I don't think Colan ever did that.
Not that I've seen.
And just as another thought on this, and the reason I'm glad that you picked this particular book is because I think a lot of people, especially people who are younger, don't have an appreciation for the fact that the character of Daredevil existed and had good stories before Frank Miller came along.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is more like the swashbuckling era of Daredevil. And that's the character is like that really throughout the 1960s. And then as we get into the Bronze Age, you get some more fun, funky, wacky stuff like Moondragon and Steve Gerber stories, which are also all really fun. And Daredevil's kind of all over the place in the Bronze Age. The Black Widow team-ups, which are great. And then, of course, you get to Miller, and then it's another ball game. And then we're getting into crime noir and obviously the Daredevil Netflix series, which I loved. I mean, that, really borrows heavily from the Miller.
Oh, absolutely. And I love the Miller era. I don't want to downplay it all. But it did start the trend of what else can we do to just beat up this guy? There was no love of life for Matt Murdough, really, once Miller took over.
It's a good point, because this period that there's again, like I said, there's that more exuberant swashbuckling, and like a lot of his villains are like the Jester, and which is a favorite of Murd's, and all these really more fun, colorful. I mean, like I think
Stilt Man, the
Purple Man. Well, the Purple Man was fully realized as a truly terrifying villain later on, but
especially in the Jennifer Jones Netflix series.
Man. Yeah, and the comic that was based on, and but like Cobra, Mr. Hyde, and Hate Monger, and not Hate Monger, Mr. Fear, excuse me, all good stuff.
But when they were coming out, again, we get into the era when I just first started buying comics. When I first started buying Daredevil, it was the Black Spectre run that we've covered on this show actually in depth, but with the Mandrill and Necra, who have since become almost joke characters. But when I read that, they were like, it was I thought they were very imposing at the time.
Yep.
So do I need to ask if you can give this A's across the board?
Oh, without question.
I am going to concur because I just cannot. Yet again, I can't find fault to this issue. The pencil work is just absolutely gorgeous. You know what? I'm gonna differentiate from you, and I'm gonna say I'm giving the artwork an A+.
All right.
I'm not even going an A. I'm going
Fair
an
enough.
A+. It's just so beautiful.
Yep.
And you know what? I'm gonna even give the story an A+. I'm giving this one A+ all along because I just think this is such a seminal issue. I really do, and I think it's just I am very proud that I have this one in my collection as well.
Yeah, and that cover though. Woof. Oh.
It's not a typical cover by any stretch of the imagination.
And in fact, I think they did the logo differently for this particular issue too, if I remember correctly.
It is definitely done differently. I don't know if it's the only time that they used this particular font for it, but it is definitely not one that they used often, if even ever again.
Yeah. Great.
So I guess we're going to call it at that point, and we're coming in just under the wire of the time that we thought we might finish. Ian, I'm disappointed Ian wasn't able to join us, but as I said, he had other important things to take care of, so I can never fault anybody for that. So I'm going to see when he's available to have him on, and he'll cover his book then. And certainly, by all means, if you guys would like to come along with him, you're welcome back again.
Just let me know what it is. If I can make it, I will.
I prefer not to wait. I know you have your own recording schedule to take care of, so I can only impose on you so much. But just the same, whenever I can have the pleasure of your company, I'm happy to.
Paul, we're always happy to come on. It's always a good time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And next time, I promise I'll choose something a little more accessible.
Like Paul said, your choice was great because it was so different, and I learned I'd never even heard of this book, so I loved hearing your description of it.
Same here. I'm very happy with your choice. Oh, did Ian just jump on with us?
I sure did, gentlemen. How are you?
We're doing well, but we were just wrapping up the show.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll just jump on to send my regards then. Here's what I was suggesting was that why don't we find out when you're available in the not too distant future, and we'll try and join up again. Yeah, no, absolutely fine. I kind of figured you guys were wrapping up. I just wanted to jump on to say hello.
It's good to hear from you. But
Levy Poo, so swell.
I hope you had a good family get together, and as I was saying, that trumps recording sessions by every time out.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. We went to a place not too far from here that's like a Peruvian Japanese fusion place that makes sushi out of like plantains and chicharron and what have you. It was stunning.
Outstanding.
Peruvian Japanese, my goodness.
Yeah, I know. Not exactly the usual, to say the least. It's called
not surprising though, because Peru does have a Japanese minority.
Good point, actually. Good point.
I would not have known that.
Yep.
Yep. All right. Well, I won't take away from the end of the show. I just, like I said, I just wanted to send my regards. And yeah, Paul, we can meet up sometime in the not too distant future and try to schedule something.
All right. So I will be in touch with all of you guys, and whoever is available, that's great. And whoever isn't, I totally understand, and we'll move it along from then. But in the meanwhile, thank you all for making the time to be on here tonight.
Oh, you bet, Paul. Thank you. And we'll be sure to get this on our show as well, so we can get more people hearing it. It'd be great.
Yep.
And thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to our show, and we hope you'll continue to join us each and every week for more good old-fashioned comic book back issue awesomeness. You can contact Back to the Bins to leave feedback, comments, questions, suggestions, and criticisms via email at bins@twotruefreaks.com or by joining the Back to the Bins group on Facebook. Back to the Bins is a proud affiliate of the Two True Freaks Internet Radio Network, which you may find at www.twotruefreaks.com. Two True Freaks is a registered trademark of DiManzo Corp of Milan, Italy. All rights reserved. Please take a moment to stop by the twotruefreaks.com site and check out their many other fine podcasts, won't you? Thanks, and we'll see you next week.